but the first thing I always ask is to state who you are and where you kind of lived and where you live now.
Okay. So my name is Clenise Platt, and I actually live in Virginia Beach. I have been a lifelong resident of Virginia Beach, actually.
Okay, perfect.
Hmm.
So I know that you've been here since childhood, and there's a
Yes.
connection between your childhood and the garden. Tell me a little about little Clenise and her trips to the garden.
Well, it was amazing because when I was growing up, my mom loves interior design. She loves decorating, architecture, and gardening. And so when my brother and I were younger, this was one of our stops. We would come over here, we would hang out, walk around, and I really had this love for the garden. Just being able to number one, look around and see nature was beautiful. But then my favorite spot, actually, and I need to get back there for a moment, but my favorite spot was when we would walk up the hill
Mm.
and be able to go and look at the airplanes as they flew. You know, I just love that as a young girl because all I was thinking about was, oh my gosh, the adventure
Mm.
that these people are going on. And I absolutely love that. And then to come back down, walk around the garden some more was just wonderful. And we actually came here a lot for cultural events, like with my church, with school, all types of things. So when I came back to the garden, to be honest with you, it had been a long time
Mm.
since I had been to the garden when I was a little girl, but it was kind of like a nice reunion. Like, oh, look at you coming back home for a moment.
It's like your own homecoming, you
Really,
know.
it was.
Just the hill is still there.
Yeah.
You know, that one tree, you're like that one tree, I remember that tree. You know, there's a joy of a nostalgia moment with the garden.
Yeah.
And and of course growing up around it, it's such a pleasure to be able to reminisce on those good times.
Absolutely.
And so you kind of sort of came back to the garden, but in a more of a stronger way than you ever imagined. So I heard through the grapevine that you were part of Rotary, and we had a new president, and he said you need to be a part of this garden. So tell me your journey about getting on the board of North Botanical Garden. You know, you go from
Sure.
childhood to board. That's a big jump.
That's a huge jump. And it was funny because I was very engaged and active in Rotary. We were starting a new program that I was the chair of. And what we were looking for were different individuals who had participated in different programs in
Mm.
Rotary throughout the years. And someone sent me an email and said, we found out that the new CEO of Norfolk Botanical Garden, Michael Desplaines, is a Rotarian and he participated in one of these programs. So I emailed him and I was like, can I stop by? I want to explain to you kind of what we're doing. We were actually creating a charter alumni association. So he would have been one of our first members, which was awesome. And he was like, sure. So when I came and I sat down, I started talking to him. We got all of that straight. And all of a sudden he was like, oh, and by the way, you need to be on the board here. And I was like, what? And so he started recruiting immediately. And he said, would you think about it? And I told him I would. And I didn't share with him at that time. But as I was leaving, I reminisced about the fact that isn't that ironic that I was a little girl running around here, and now this gentleman is inviting me back, but in a role as a board member. And it was even more significant because I had probably maybe 2 years before I had found out about the fact that the garden's history included 220 African American men and women who literally were what I call the OGs, the original gardeners. And so to think about that and to think, wow, okay, so this gentleman is asking me, okay, I really knew that if I could make it happen, that I would. If I could find the time, that I would definitely do that. And so I said yes, and that began an amazing journey that I had no idea, literally no idea what that journey would be like, but that's how it started.
There is this kind of attraction to this garden space when people really find their roots here,
Mm-hmm.
and how amazing it is to be part of the table. You know, you first you're on the hill and now you're at the table, and being
Mm-hmm.
able to help make decisions and to know that their history of the garden is with these 220 African American men and women
Yeah,
who truly did the work to set us up at this table.
absolutely.
And there's so much pride in that. And so you did find the time, I see, and you stuck around for quite a
A
while
long
because
time.
eventually you ended up being the chair of the board. So tell me about that journey. So we go from being asked to be on the board, you found the
Right.
time, and you create sort of, you know, help guide the garden through some tough times, and then COVID hits, and you're on the board and you're running the chair. So there's this weird nuanced time that the world is going through, and the garden made a decision. And you're part of that decision of staying open during COVID
Right.
because it was one of the few places in this area that people could actually leave their house and still find a mental space.
Well, that is so true. And I want to tell a specific story about the COVID time frame. But let me just share that when I got on the board, one of the first things Mike asked me to do was to be a part of the finance committee because I have a background in finance. And so I said, okay, sure, no problem. And then also, he invited me to be on the PCID committee and to attend the Heritage Celebration. And I might get a little emotional because the first Heritage Celebration that I went to, actually, Mrs. Ferguson was there. And I was so moved, number one, just by, and actually, it was outside in the garden area where the statue is, as well as the beautiful azalea garden, where actually where the original gardeners planted. And it was just, honestly, I had such a, it was so heartwarming for me to attend that, to look at the descendants of the folks that had done this work, that created this space that now hundreds of thousands of people per year actually are able to come and enjoy. And it really moved me. I am a writer and I wrote a piece about it because I just was so moved by that. And so once I got involved on the finance committee, the next thing Mike did was like, hey, by the way, would you mind being the treasurer? I was like, Mike, what? So I became the treasurer and he just loved it. Oh, Miss Platt. Miss Platt is this, and you know, and he would talk about, you know, the dollars that we had. And by me being in that role, it also put me on the executive committee. And being on the executive committee was important because one of the things that Mike had such energy and such a vision, and one of the things that he wanted to think about was, can we begin to do a major capital campaign and do some building? So this was many years before what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
And I was on the executive committee. We had some consultants come in, and actually, past President Ryan Snow reminded me of the story. I was like, and he actually told my parents about it, which was so cute. But the board had to make a decision about, because the consultants were saying, listen, we did some research, and honestly, the most that we think that you all will be able to raise will be about $6 million. You all are really not known well in this area. And people were like, would I give money to that? Mm. And so the executive committee had to make a recommendation to the board for the board to vote on that. And so Ryan tells a story that I said during the executive committee as we were all talking about it. Well, who are they to tell us what we can and cannot do? And I told him, I said, you know, I vaguely remember that. But I just felt like, let's not put any limitations on ourselves first. You know, let's see what we can do before we automatically say no. And so actually the executive committee, we did make the recommendation to move forward. And it is because we moved forward with that we have the Garden of Tomorrow, and we have all of the things that we are experiencing right now. And that to me is an incredible legacy, because I didn't even know Ryan was listening to that. But I really am proud that I was at the table. You know, my dad says to me and my brother, he said to us when we were growing up, you are strategically placed, and remember that.
Mm.
And I'm so glad that I was strategically placed at the table that day. So I wanted to tell that story. I became the treasurer, and then eventually rolled off because I became the district governor for District 7600 for Rotary, which had about 20 over 2,000 members from Blackstone to Emporia. That's important because it brings us to COVID. And I had to step away from a leadership role. I was a member of the board, but one of the things that I knew I wanted to do as the district governor, because everything, as we know, shut down. And with that many people across from Blackstone to Emporia, we knew there were some specific things I had planned for the end of the year, and we couldn't make that happen. So I had the idea to say, can we do a virtual road trip? And I called Mike and I said, Mike, this is what I want to do. I want to do a virtual road trip. Will you be able to take us on a tour virtually and then allow me to ask you some questions about your Rotary journey and all of that? And Mike said yes. And that was our first virtual road trip. We had about 80 people from across the district that joined in. There were kids, there were family members, but it speaks to going back to the decision about leaving the garden open so that people could come here and find respite, find peace, find encouragement, be refreshed at a time when really it was very difficult and it was a time of uncertainty. And to be able to do that, of course, for our community was huge. But then for Mike to work with me to make that happen for our Rotarians as well, and to go on a tour, and people were so excited and they were asking questions of Mike. That was a significant, to me, that was a significant moment for the garden to make a difference with Rotarians across the state of Virginia during the time of COVID. And I love that. I just love that. And so when I finished as my service as a district governor, it was a 3-year commitment, 1-year term. All of a sudden, I got a call. Actually, I got a text or I think it was a text or an email. Hey, can you call me? It was from Mike. And I was like, okay, sure. And I called him and he said, hello, Miss Platt. And he said, listen, would you consider, I know you're just finishing being district governor, but would you consider being nominated to be the board chair? And it really surprised me. I will be honest with you. By this time, I had been on the board probably about maybe about 6 years, because might have been 7, because I was coming to my 3rd term. And I said, let me think about it. Well, wait a minute, really? And he said, yes, yes. And I was asked to step up because the current chair had to leave. And so I actually was only going to be serving, because the way my term was, originally I was only going to be serving as chair for 1 year. But once she left, it became a 2-year term for me, even though it's normally a little bit longer than that. And I was amazed because the nominating chair, when the board voted me in, was very moving. Once again, you know, when you are in these moments, you're not thinking about you're not thinking about the moment. You're just thinking about, oh, okay, this is an opportunity. Can I make this work with life that's happening for me? And I also felt like that I was coming in at a time where we were really seriously getting ready to put boots on the ground for Garden of Tomorrow. And I knew I believed in it. I knew our board believed in it. I loved our board members. They were amazing people. And so when I said yes, and they were getting ready to vote me in, the nominating chair, Anita Poston, came to me and she said, we have been waiting to do this. And I said, wait, what? What do you mean? Oh yeah, we wanted to ask you this a while back. But then you went and became district governor. And I was amazed because I had no clue. I had no clue that they were even thinking about me. in that way. And so when I became the board chair, it was significant because once again, recognizing the history of the garden. When I come into the garden, unless I'm running late, when I drive in, there's a place that I pause and I look is in my car. I'll stop and I'll look over at the statue and I'll look over at the water spring, and that's just my spot. That spot is significant for me because that night when they voted me in, what I was thinking in my mind, of course, along with being honored, and I knew it was a serious position. What I was thinking was those men and women would never, maybe they would have, but I don't know that they would have imagined that they could sit at the table. Not only sit at the table, but be a leader at that table. And it was significant for me. You know, I knew I wanted to do an excellent job, not just because I'm Hattie and Clinton Platt's daughter, and it's their legacy as well. I feel like everything that I do is their legacy as well. Not just because I care about what I do and I want to do it with integrity. And I had great leadership experiences and have been involved in leadership positions in the community as well as professionally. But I also wanted to do a good job because of those 220 African Americans that were the original gardeners, that though they planted the garden, literally could not come back into the garden to enjoy it, and definitely would not have been invited to be on the board of directors or to be at the in the leadership role. So that was very important for me.
And it's such an amazing thing because we talk about the history of the world outside the garden, right? Affects the gates, of course, inside the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's still hard to find seats at the table, but when we get those first moments, it's a numbing moment. We're honored, and then sometimes it takes us a second to think about, oh my gosh, like they voted for me. I don't even think this would have happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but they saw me as a
Mm-hmm.
person, but also a leader and someone to guide them. And
Mm-hmm.
that speaks volumes, whether people
Mm-hmm.
know that or not.
Yeah.
And to be an African American, to sit at a botanical garden and to have a seat that high up speaks volumes about the area that we live
Yeah.
in and how necessary they see that people need to be put in places. And we don't know how, but it's always strategic. We somehow show up at the right time, we meet the right person, and we find ourselves at a seat that we never imagined, and we make such a legacy for the next.
Right.
And it's such a beautiful story. So I do want to take this amazing story and I want to add a little bit more to it.
Okay.
So we talked about PCID, President's Council for Inclusive
Yes.
Diversity, the committee, what you have done since
them.
you've been here, right? So it
Love
started
them.
early and, it had a different name back in 2002, 2003, and it's grown into the President's Council for Inclusive Diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me some highlights about while you were on that committee as far as running it, what you have left for the next generation.
So I love, love, love my peoples on PCID. I just have to say, because they were so welcoming to me and welcoming to me, along with the board, and being on the board, but then being on PCID, they were so welcoming with me and to me. And when I came in, I was new. And one of the things that I always say when you're new, when you have ideas, it's good to kind of take a step back because you don't want anybody to feel like, oh, look at this person. Oh, what you just think, you think nobody else had any ideas. And I was so appreciative. Like I took the time to really learn. I talked to the chair at the time, Paul Van Brown, who was amazing. But I took the time to learn about the history of PCID and what they had done. And when I actually became the chair eventually of PCID. And when I became chair, one of the things that actually right before I became chair, one of the things that I recommended was it's awesome. The Heritage Celebration is awesome because we're celebrating the individuals that got us here. But how can we celebrate the individuals that are being groundbreakers right now? And I said, y'all, what do y'all think about a Groundbreakers Award? And could we make that happen? And they were so welcoming to that idea. And they were like, okay. And they said, well, maybe we can do it next year. Do you really think we can do it this year? I said, I really do. I think we can do it. And so, literally that year, we had three groundbreakers. And I don't know if I can remember. I know Gianni was one. I can't remember her last name, but she was a young kid who actually collected 1,000 dolls and gave them to homeless shelters because she wanted people to have, and she made sure that the dolls were people included dolls of color and everything so everybody could see themselves, because that's a very hard moment to be in. And so we loved her story. Cecilia Tucker, who is just an institution in this area and was at Old Dominion University and now is at Virginia Wesleyan and is big in Rotary. I mean, what hasn't Cece done? She was one of the groundbreakers. And then we had a lady, her first name was May, and I can't remember exactly her last name, Breckenridge something. But anyway, that was our first group. That was in 2016. And we have continued that legacy on. I remember we had the youth poet laureate for the state of Virginia as one. I mean, we honored the students who actually determined or discovered the names of some of the individuals of the 220 African American men and women, which was awesome. I was so glad to do that. And then the other piece to that, I mean, it's just been great because we really have made a conscious effort to ensure that we are honoring groundbreakers today. And I think that's a great bridge between the past, but also the present now. The other piece that, other thing that, one of the things I did when I first joined the board, and the garden had a piece called WPA the Gardeners, and it was at the Chrysler Museum as part of a exhibit there. And so Mazel, who actually was the artist, um, I talked to Mike and he was like, yeah, we love that piece. We would love to have it as possibly, part of our permanent collection here. So one of the things that I did was planned a summer soiree at the Chrysler Museum, invited Mazel to come. We had lunch together. Some of our PCID members, some of our board members came after the lunch, and Mazel talked to us about the piece there. And we said, we would love to purchase this. That led to us doing cocktails in the garden to help raise additional dollars, speaking to sponsors, somebody that would do a matching. And we have WPA gardeners in our permanent collection right now, which is awesome. The other thing that was very, 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 very important for me was I really wanted us to find a way to celebrate the history of the original gardeners by finding young people who want to be in green spaces. And so I was like, what if we did a scholarship? And everybody was like, oh Lord, there goes Clenise again. That idea took a little bit longer actually for people to warm up to. And so actually, I think I had the idea in 2017, 2018, but I am so glad to report that last year we honored our first, that just makes me so happy. We honored our first PCID scholarship winner. And that was so significant. But looking at the Garden of Tomorrow, looking at the board members that we have, when he decided he was going to leave, one of the things that he said was that he was so proud that we had a board that really was more reflective of our community than it had ever been before. And to be a part of that was awesome. But also the things that we've done with PCID. And even though I'm no longer chair of PCID, I still so support it and believe in its mission.